This winter was one of the hardest I had ever seen. Snow covered everything and the mountain roads had turned into ice tunnels. I was driving on a deserted road to get home as soon as possible. It was midnight and only the light of my car headlights broke the darkness around me. The air was so cold that even the car heater was barely providing heat. I pulled my gloves tighter and turned on the radio, but only a hissing sound came out of it. I turned it off in despair and looked at the road. The road was slippery and I didn't want to lose control of the car. At that moment, my phone rang. I looked at the screen in surprise. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, but curiosity made me answer. "Hello?" For a few seconds, I only heard a faint breath on the other end of the line. Then a trembling voice said, "Help! Help me!" My heart beat faster. It was the sound of someone breathing heavily as if they were freezing. "Where are you? What happened?" I asked. His voice became weaker. "It's cold. I'm freezing. I'm stuck in the snow. Please." I glanced around briefly. There was no sign of a car in the snow. This road was almost deserted, especially at this time of night. "Calm down. Tell me where you're stuck. I can help you." There was a rustling sound as if someone had dragged a phone across the snow. Then a vague voice that seemed to come from far away whispered, "The cemetery, by the side of the road." I froze. I knew this road well. The only cemetery on this route had been abandoned years ago. No one was buried there anymore and no one alive had ever gone there. I slowed down, my eyes searching for any sign of someone stuck in the snow. But there was no one there, just the snow-covered gravestones, ghostly in the darkness. The phone was still in my hand, but there was no sound. I looked at the screen. The call had been disconnected. I saved the number and called again. The message came. "This number does not exist." A cold feeling penetrated my body even deeper than the winter cold. It was as if something invisible was watching me from among those old graves. I didn't hesitate any longer. I put my foot on the gas and sped away. But I never forgot that sound. And since that night, every winter that comes, I ask myself, was there someone stuck in the snow? I heard someone buried in this snow long ago. It was bitterly cold. The wind howled through the bare branches of the trees, and snow was falling steadily from the gray sky. I was alone in the house, wrapped in a blanket, trying to warm myself with a cup of tea. The house was quiet. A heavy silence reigned, except for the occasional sound of branches bending and cracking under the weight of the snow. My eyes fell on the window. The glass was steamed from the cold outside, but something outside caught my attention. The thick snow on the ground looked untouched and pristine, but right under the window were a few footprints. In the dead of night, this was strange. I had been home all day and had not heard a sound from outside. Maybe it was just a passerby passing through the backyard. Maybe the mailman or a neighbor who had taken the wrong turn. I tried to push the thought out of my head, but my curiosity wouldn't let me go. I went to the window and ran my fingertips over the steamed glass to get a better look. The blood froze in my veins. The footprints were getting closer. My breath caught in my chest. It was as if someone had taken a few steps forward since I had first seen them. But I hadn't seen any movement. I had only looked up for a moment, and now the footprints were moving closer to the house. I took a step back, trying to convince myself that this was just an illusion. Maybe they were already there and I just hadn't noticed them. Maybe the street light had made me notice them for the first time. But then I looked back out the window. The footprints were getting closer again. It was impossible. I felt something catch in my throat. My heart was beating wildly. With trembling hands, I pulled the curtain. Something deep inside me warned me not to look, but my mind wouldn't resist. I wanted to know who was out there. I prayed with all my heart that I wouldn't see anything. But I did. A man stood right under the window, tall, with skin so unnaturally white, as if his entire being were made of ice. His clothes were old and tattered, as if he had been lost in a snowstorm for years. His eyes were empty, no pupils, no sign of life, just two black holes staring into my soul. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. He just stood there, motionless. But I felt like I was going to be pulled into the house at any moment, like prey staring into the eyes of a hunter. Suddenly, with a thud from outside, the street light went out. Darkness engulfed everything. I felt my heart in my throat. I turned off the light in the room so I wouldn't be seen. But just then, the sound of breathing came from behind the window. Harsh, heavy, inhuman. I felt like I wouldn't survive if I stayed there even for a moment longer. I ran with all my might, locked the door, and wrapped the blanket tightly around me. I tried to take a deep breath, but there was a soft tapping on the window. I didn't dare to look. I just closed my eyes and prayed that whatever it was would go away. In the morning, when the first rays of sunlight shone into the house, I calmed down. With trembling hands, I pulled back the curtain and looked outside. No one was there, but the footprints had reached the windowsill, and right next to them, on the glass, there was the imprint of a frozen hand. And I never liked snowy nights again. Winter nights were always strange to me. The heavy silence, the bone-chilling cold, and the fog that engulfed the alleys. I always thought that in this silence and darkness, there were things hidden, things that didn't need light to be seen. That night, my last class ended late. It was after 10 o'clock, and the only way home was through the empty, fog-covered alleys that I always dreaded. But I had no choice. I shoved my hands in my coat pockets, lowered my head, and walked faster. The streets were covered in fresh snow, making everything eerily quiet. The only sound was the soft crunch of my boots against the snow. But after a few minutes, I realized I wasn't alone. I slowed my steps. The sound was still there. I stopped. The sound stopped too. I held my breath and looked around. The dim street lights barely made their way through the thick fog, as if something in the air was swallowing the light. I took a step forward. The sound followed, exactly in time with my footsteps. I was sure now, someone was behind me. I picked up my pace. My heart was pounding in my ribs. I lowered my head and focused on getting home. But I could feel it, that heavy gaze that was tired behind me. It was like something in the fog behind me was watching, waiting. No, I couldn't think like that. I couldn't let fear take over me. But with every step I took, I could feel the shadow in the fog getting closer. I couldn't take it anymore. I stopped abruptly and turned around, panting. No one was there, but the fog had shifted a little, and at the end of the alley, a shadow stood. I frowned. Maybe it was just a street light or a tree, but no, it looked like a person. Tall, still almost blending into the fog. I had to run, but my feet were frozen in place. The shadow moved. No, I didn't imagine it. It moved towards me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I knew only one thing. I couldn't stand there. I couldn't let this thing, whatever it was, get any closer. I ran. The snow crunched under my feet. My heart pounded in my ears, and the sound of the second footsteps, the ones following me, grew louder. I ran faster, faster and faster. My house wasn't far now, just a few more streets. But that sound, the footsteps behind me, they were getting faster. I didn't know how long I ran. Maybe a minute, maybe 10. But when I finally saw my house, I almost collapsed from the overwhelming relief. I reached the door, fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking. I turned the knob, jumped in, and closed the door behind me. Gasping, I pressed my back against the door, my heart still pounding. Silence. Everything was silent again. No footsteps, no breathing, as if a shadow had vanished. With every ounce of courage I had, I lifted the curtain and looked outside. And in that moment the world stopped. It was still there, standing right outside the window, motionless, and its eyes sparkled in the darkness of the night. Was it real or not?